So welcome back to week 6 of Herbs for Health in the Concrete Gardens. Today in our last session we're going to look at a lot of autumn berries and berry plants that you can use to help with your immune system, especially with the cold and flu season coming up. So the first plant we're going to look at as a tea. Now it is a berry, but this is not a berry. You can probably tell that. You might recognise it. It's obviously much more recognisable when it's on the plant with its berries. And this is blackberry. So we can make a blackberry leaf tea, which we've made here, which basically put in a leaf, boiling water, and then let it sit covered for maybe 10-15 minutes. And the taste of that tea is actually there's a slightly blackberry taste to it, which seems a bit unusual because it doesn't look anything like the berry. But the main action that this tea has is that it's astringent, it's drying, so it's good in cases of, like, if you've got any bleeding, or even for things, seems to be one that we use quite a lot, even things like diarrhea. So blackberry obviously is around at the moment. The berries themselves are very good from the immune system point of view because they've got lots of vitamin C in them, and they're really tasty, which is also helpful. One of the things you should know about blackberry is blackberry leaf and raspberry leaf are very similar. They're both very drying, although raspberry leaf has an additional effect in terms of the working in the womb and being good for period problems and during pregnancy and childbirth. The real difference is that the blackberry, when you can't see the berries, you can tell because the blackberry leaf is green on both sides and the raspberry leaf is silvery underneath, so it's just a handy way to be able to tell them apart. But yeah, blackberry leaf it makes a nice refreshing tea, and it's good if you're just trying to kind of dry things, or if you've got any kind of disturbing things going on with that. Blackberry is also in the rose family, so it's yet another rose, and the Latin name is Rubus fructicosus. And raspberry is Rubus idaeus, so that's how you could tell them apart. So that's just a wee quick one to start off with. So now on to our berries proper. So we've got 3 different berries here that we're going to try and make some stuff with. So the first one will kind of work up in intensity, or down in intensity of flavour. So the first one here, you might recognise these leaves and berries. There is one of these outside St Matthew's, and this is Rowan, or depends on who's understanding my accent. Its name is Sorbus acuparia. It's another one in the rose family. We've got a lot of rose family favourites, and you will see that the little berries, there's a similarity with the hawthorn, but they're distinctly more orange colour, and these leaves very different to the hawthorn. Rowan's sometimes called mountain ash. It's not related to the ash tree, but the leaves are very similar. So if you're familiar with ash, you can get familiar with Rowan. It grows a lot in cities and in towns. I am not going to sample a berry on screen because I probably won't be able to talk for about 20 minutes afterwards. They are both very, very sour and very, very astringent and drying. So it's basically getting a really kind of lemony, sour taste, and then all of the liquid being sucked out of your mouth. So it's fun to experiment with, but it's a bit much to do very often. So the main use is another one that's really high in vitamin C. One of the main uses of Rowan is to make Rowan jelly that people might be familiar with. So it's sweetened quite a lot to kind of get cut through that sourness and that dryness. And it's a thing that's very, very popular with gamey meats because it's got that really kind of sour, and it's got the sweet cutting through as well. What I'm going to try is doing some fermenting the berries. So I've got some berries in this little jar here. I'm just going to do a few more. With most berries, so it's the same with the hawthorn, you want the berry to be ripe enough so that there's like a bit of a squish in it, but also if you just pinch it at the bottom, it comes off nice and cleanly, to the point that there's like a teeny bit of orange left behind on these ones. So I'm just going to pop these into, one's gone missing, the jar here. And there's a little dead bit on this one, so we could just take that bit and discard it. So you want it to be berries. For the purposes of this, the berries are going to be staying whole. So if there's any ones that are a little bit kind of mushed or something like that, I would just leave those. But if you were going to make a jelly or a jam, or people refer to a Rowan cheese, which is almost like a hardened kind of cross between a jelly and a jam, that one's gone. So pop these all in. So what we're going to do is ferment these just using water. So we've got some, so this was purified water, and what I'm going to do is, so just pour it in. I'm not going to bother being too careful because we're going to use the jar in a jar method to keep this down. So I've got a little jar that fits in perfectly, that holds, oh, and water everywhere. That holds them down. That's the reason why you should put it in a bowl. And then you just take muslin, again, tea towel's fine for this, or any other bit of material. Your, again, kitchen roll might get a little bit wet and start to rip. So you put this in place with an elastic band, and you just check on that every day. And what you want to do is have a wee taste of these berries that are in there, and see if they're starting to get fizzy, and you'll know what I mean when you taste it. You just leave this sitting out somewhere, and in anywhere, it depends on the kind of conditions, but anywhere between 2 to 4, maybe even 5, but it's usually pretty quick days, these are fermented, and then you can actually use them then to put as a topping on things. You can also do the same with blackberries, and they will get quite nice and fizzy. And the point of the fermenting is it's helping to start break down some of the stuff that's in the berries before you eat it, so that it's easier to digest, but also the fizziness is caused by different bacteria that are good for your gut. So those can go in, and it's all these probiotic things and prebiotic things that people talk about. Fermented foods are really fantastic for that. You do need to keep an eye on it, because you're obviously it's some berries and some water in the corner of your kitchen. If you do get a mould on it, start again. It only takes a few days, and there's a lot of rowan berries out there. So like I say, that was rowan berries from the rowan tree. The next one we're going to look at is one that isn't an elder. It used to be in the honeysuckle family, but I think it is now in the muscatel family, which is Adoxaceae, for anyone who's keeping up with that. And people might recognise these. These are elderberries, so very, very kind of distinctly dark berries. They've got these leaves, which have got 5 kind of different leaflets coming off them. And when this was in the tree, these would have been hanging down, and that means they're ripe and ready to go. There are a couple here that aren't quite ripe yet, but that's fine. You can just sort of work around them. So elder is Sambucus nigra, and like I said, it's Adoxaceae, which is muscatel. These berries, again, stacks of vitamin C, but these are also specifically antiviral, and they've got loads of other kind of immune boosting properties. You can also use elder flowers, which we get earlier on in the year. They are slightly antiviral. They don't have quite as much vitamin C because they're not in a berry form, but they also do other things as well. Like they're very good for allergies and hay fever and things like that. So what we're going to do with elderberry is make a shrub, which is slightly confusing because the elder tree some people call a shrub, but a shrub is a sweetened vinegar that you can either use as a sort of tonic to drink, or you can dilute it with water, with cold water, warm water, sparkling water, whatever you like. It's a really, really nice thing to try. So I've got some elderberries out. Now the easiest way to process elderberries is to pop these in the freezer, and then when they come out of the freezer, it's just much easier to take these little berries off without them squishing. It's fine if they squish, but it just is a little bit easier if they're cold from the freezer. So I had some that had frozen that have taken off, and they've started, I don't know if we can see that the liquid started to kind of come out of them a little bit. So I'll put a few of these in as well. So like I say, considerably easier. So when they're frozen, what I like to do is kind of sort of roll them between my fingers, and that means they just come away really easily. But when you're doing it like this, you really have to pick. And with the elder, more so than anything else, you really want to make sure you've got as few stalks as possible in, because elderberry and elderflower are the only really edible bits of the elder. People are doing things with the bark, but the leaf and the stem have some kind of pretty unpleasant bits to them. So you want to leave quite a clean kind of stalk behind, with getting minimal amounts of stalk into your jar. So I'm nearly finished with this, but this takes a few seconds if they're frozen. The other advantage of freezing them as well is if you say have an elder tree near you or one in your garden, quite often the different bits of the tree the berries will get ripe at different times. So you might want to maybe just put things in the freezer over a period of a few weeks and then process them all at the same time. For this particular recipe with the vinegar, it's really quite easy just to fill part of a jar and put some vinegar on top, and then as you're going along, add more elderberries in. You probably want to be about 50-50 berries to vinegar. So you would do that by weight and by volume. So the weight of elderberries in grams would be the same as the volume of apple cider vinegar in millilitres. So I'm just going to pour, and with the cider vinegar, of course, we don't have to worry about too much about the preservation in terms of the elderberries staying beneath the surface, because the berries themselves have got lots of medicinal stuff and the vinegar is really preserving. So that's quite a vibrant colour already because some of the juice has started to come out of those frozen ones. So we put this somewhere dark for a couple of weeks. It can sit for a few months, so if you had a bigger container, over time just adding more elderberries periodically, maybe adding a little bit extra vinegar if you feel like the elderberry level is getting too high, and then you can strain this off. The pulp which is left behind, try to strain most of that through if you can, but you don't want to let any seeds through, as the seeds are slightly laxative. That'll have been reduced a little bit by the vinegar, but you wouldn't want to be drinking a massive volume of pippy seeds anyway. And then you would take that, so the vinegar on its own is a perfectly good drink, a perfectly good tonic thing to take for immunity and for vitamin C, for antiviral properties. But what you can do to make it more interesting is get equal amounts of sugar to the volume of the liquid, so grams of sugar to millilitres of liquid. Warm it gently because you don't want to denature the vitamin C too much, and then dissolve that and bottle it up, and that's your shrub, so that's your sweetened vinegar. You can also, if you don't want to be putting that much sugar in, you can do it with honey, but you probably don't want to heat the honey as much as that. So if you want to do that, what I would suggest is get your vinegar and store it just as a simple vinegar, and then when you come to use it, add honey to it. So it's particularly nice as a warm drink in the winter. So tablespoon of this, hot water, and then just maybe stir through a teaspoon of honey. That's a really nice combination. Or if there's other sweeteners that you like to use, you can use those as well. So that was the elder, Sambucus nigra. So this is the plant that we get rosehips from. It's often, people would call it rosehip, but its actual name is dog rose or Rosa canina. And I think it's our final, no, not quite final actually, it's another Rosaceae plant. It has a lot of thorns, which is quite typical of lots of Rosaceae plants, or rose family. But the bit that we're really interested in are these little hips, and these are varying degrees of ripeness. You can tell that it's ripe when it's red around to the back of the stem, and it should come off fairly easily when you pinch it quite cleanly, and there's just like a little bit of give to it as well. So rose hips, a lot of people know, are very high in vitamin C, and they're good for your immune system. They were collected during World War II to make a tonic for pregnant women. And the story is that children used to pick them whenever they were wet in the rain, because you got paid by weight of rosehip, so that you got a bit more if they had rain on them. But what we're going to do is make them into a syrup that you can take through the winter to boost vitamin C and to help to fight off infections. Now, the official medicinal version are these little kind of bullet-like rosehips, and they are, so that's the Rosa canina. You also see these kind of tomato-y like ones. That's Rosa rugosa, or sometimes called either Chinese or Japanese rose. These are easier to process because they're really juicy and they're a bit squishy already. This is the one that I just picked, and it is ripe, but there's not a lot of give in it. So what I've done is I'm using a mixture, which means that it probably won't be quite as medicinal, but it will have plenty of vitamin C in it, because these little things are just like packed with like vitamin C, but they possibly don't have quite all of the rest of the immune things, but it's just a wee bit of a cheat. And another cheat is that I've frozen a lot of these that I brought from home, and once they're frozen you can literally just rip them in two, whereas the kind of harder ones you kind of have to go at it with a knife, and you really do need to go at it quite a bit with the knife to get in there. And this is a good point to say as well, once you get in there you see these little seeds inside. There's quite a lot of them. These are, a lot of people know them as kind of itchy things, and there are little hairs on them that can be itchy. So when you're doing things with rosehip, you always want to prepare and then strain. You can, if you don't get affected by the itchy things, you can have a nibble of these, but a lot of people find that a bit much. So we're going to make some rosehip syrup. The first thing to do is either in a food processor or with a big spoon, you get your rose hips, so I've got a mixture, and just sort of bash them up, because you want to expose as much of the surface of them as possible we're going to be putting them in boiling water and then straining them and then putting them in boiling water again and then straining them and then sweetening them with the sugar. So I'm really wanting to kind of break these up as much as possible, just so we've got good. And I've chopped most of the little hard ones and I've squished lots of the little frozen ones. But this is another one where the freezer is your friend. You could use a food processor, but it is just that bit easier to freeze them, and the freezing won't affect the vitamin C. Now, you can just make rosehip syrup by heating up the rose hips in some hot water and then straining that and then sweetening it. If you want to make it to be a wee bit more medicinal, what you really need to do is put them in boiled water rather than keep them boiling, and do that a couple of times. So for this, I measured this, and this was about 200 grams, just shy of 200 grams. So I'll put another one in. Oops. And that should do it. So this is another one, should get to about 200 grams. So for 200 grams of rose hips, you want 800 mils of hot water in total, and you want to do that in 2 stages with slightly more the first time. So I'm going to get 500 mils of boiling water, which may take me a while. And then I'm going to put this on the heat, bring it back to a full boil, and then take it off the heat and put the rose hips in. It's not as long as I thought. That's 300 mils. So getting there. And that's almost exactly 500 mils. So I'm going to tuck this up here. And then that's that. So I want to get this up and boiling again. So, like I said, I'm going to boil this off the heat, pop these in for 20 minutes, and then strain them through a jelly bag, or you can do it through a kind of doubled up muslin. So this is a jelly bag. It's got a special kind of fineness that means that you can actually, it's kind of got a coating on it that means you can use it with oils as well as with liquids and vinegars. What I'm going to do is rig up a little kind of arrangement so that this can hang off the end of the table and drip into a bowl. And the way that I do that is I will use my spatula attached in an interesting way. So the spatula will be on the table, and I'm going to tie a bit of string around here and attach that like that, and then that drips down into the bowl. It just works better when you've got a little bit of height, and it means it drips through more quickly. So that's nearly boiling just now. So we're just going to let it get to a proper boil and just check these are bashed up enough as well. So that's bubbling away nicely. So I'll turn that off. So in order to maintain the vitamin C content as well as possible, we don't want to boil these vigorously. So try and get all of this out as much as we can, even the itchy seeds, and then just rinse off my spatula. Use another spatula to rinse off my spatula. So those have got 20 minutes, and then we're going to rig up to strain them. So once those have strained, we're going to keep the liquid that's in the bowl, so set that aside, put it in a jar, whatever, or put it in a clean saucepan, and then we're going to, the pulp that is inside the jelly bag, we're going to put back in the pan with the leftover 300 mils of boiling water, and then the heat turned off like we did with this one. Same thing, 20 minutes, and then strain through the bag. And then all of the liquid we're going to bring together, and however much liquid there is in millilitres, we use that amount of sugar in grams. We gently, very, very get it to just warm to the point where you can dissolve the sugar, and then decant that into little bottles, and that'll be your rosehip syrup. So that's your Rosa Canina. Okay, thank you.